McFarlane Toys announces the Justice League Task Force Build the Darkseid wave based on the original Sega Genesis and Super Nintendo game. And nobody cared. But now actually having it in hand, should people care, at least for the Batman within this wave, since we're going to have our classic set of heroes making up the wave, except for probably one of the most classic of them all, Wonder Woman. But that's a discussion for a whole another video, because frankly, I'm still kind of lost in the shuffle as far as why it is that Wonder Woman is not included here, because of how much she's taken up the space of that cover art, like I mentioned before, as opposed to even Aquaman. But again, maybe a platinum release, or maybe it's just some kind of headache that McFarlane didn't really want to deal with, considering her attire. That's personally my theory. One of the safe bets, however, was going to be Batman, because McFarlane loves Batman, and frankly, it seems like maybe he's loving him a little bit too much. Or at least this specific version of Batman. Because frankly, I'm not even going to insult your intelligence or even your visibility, your sight, if you're already watching this video and can functionally deduce that this is in fact the Nightfall Buck once more. It feels like we're getting an awful lot of Nightfall releases just coming here and being squeezed. That fruit is being squeezed as much as possible towards the back half here of 2024. First with the Night People Batman, and now with the Justice League Task Force Batman that comes included in this Darkseid Build-A-Figure wave. And so that buck is being utilized yet again for this interpretation that again is based on that classic video game. Some of people probably have some fond memories, but overall I've seen so many people's feedback, and the general consensus that the game's not all that great. It's meant to be a DC fighting game. You could argue that maybe this is the game, this is the one that needed to walk so that Injustice can run. But at the time, a lot of people just did not vibe with it. They thought that it just controlled weird. A lot of the overall, like I mentioned, consensus is that they really didn't receive the game all that greatly. I personally cannot speak for the game because I didn't play it, but once I saw that cover art, especially after the recent announcement that McFarlane was going to be making a Build-A-Figure wave based on that game property, I saw the cover art and thought to myself, yeah, I've seen it before. I just never personally sat down to play the game. I didn't even have a Super Nintendo or even the Sega Genesis, so that was kind of out of my wheelhouse. In fact, I kind of skipped that generation, and then by the time that I really started to get into video games, the N64 was out. So that just kind of got skipped by me, but I just know that whenever I visited either Toys R Us or Target at the time, or even most recently with collectible toy stores or collectible trading conventions like Frankensons, etc., where they have those games, those retro games set up, I've seen that cover art. So now pulled from that cover, we have the Nightfall Buck kind of bearing that aesthetic of being taken out of a 16-bit game. I believe this was prior to jumping over to like the next set of pixels, which I should be 32, but nonetheless, McFarlane made sure to give this kind of like a pixelized, very video gamey kind of art style. And when we saw those pictures, I think almost everybody unanimously did not like it. They didn't like the shading to make it look like it's pixelized, with the little bits of rectangles and squares kind of taking up the front of the figure here, as far as making it seem like the shading is just kind of flexing back and forth whenever the characters move in a game like that. And here in person, I gotta be honest, doesn't really look all that bad. There's really not much that I can comment as far as the buck itself, because again, we've got it just so many goddamn times that you've already seen this sculpt, you already know how I feel about it, where yes, it is in fact a very definitive buck. And it makes sense, because when you kind of start posing, moving the articulation, which I'm not really going to cover, I'm actually going to act a little lazy and simply just show you a general time lapse of the articulation, which thankfully doesn't have any problematic joints whatsoever, except maybe the head is a little difficult to tilt. And that's because this head, speaking of Nightfall bodies, I'm kind of jumping the gun here a little bit, is I believe the Nightfall 2-pack head, only then retrofitted and repainted to match the color scheming and the pixelized art style of the rest of the buck itself. So if you want to take a definitive Nightfall release that we've gotten in the past and have it be like the most cross-pollination version of it, it would be that Nightfall 2-pack, the one that has the battle damage, the blood coming out of the mouth, and I can confidently say that because of just how puffy and swollen that mouth plate really is. He's got the grimace, but of course he's got the swollen chin and the cheeks that I may not be the biggest fan of, but at least this time you got the opportunity to see what it would look like without any of the battle damage, without any of the blood or anything like that. So you have a slightly cleaner look, but if you weren't vibing with that specific expression like I was, then frankly, you're not really going to vibe with this one here because it's directly lifted from that. And even so, the cape is also pretty much identical to that version where you have this nylon fabric cape that is pretty well done as far as, like I said, stitching and matching the color scheming of the rest of the figure, but it's also just a little bit on the elongated side. The wire is actually pretty rigid and really good to pose and kind of maneuver in order to make it seem much more dynamic and pre-posed, but just know that it could have the potential of making the figure just a little bit more top heavy. But apart from that, it's pretty much a similar cape to that of either, like I mentioned, the Nightfall Buck, or at least the Nightfall 2-pack version that comes packaged in with Bane, or most recently, the Bullseye Batman that came as a platinum release at specific Walmarts, and even McFarlane started to offer on their toy store via an EQL Run Fair lottery. So if you already have those in your possession, quite frankly, it looks like you're simply just adding a repaint to that collection, to that set. And you're really not getting much different here, except he's got the fists instead of the traditional gripping hands. And there's a specific reason for that, but before we get to that, again, everything else is pretty much identical. It just really depends on whether you vibe with this Task Force aesthetic lifted from the game, that as I played with the figure and looked at the aesthetic, overall, I don't mind it. I actually like the color scheme, or at least the specific hues they got to play with here and complement each other, as far as the gray, or at least this much more darker gray, the blue, the specific shading of the blue, the Jolly Rancher blue as I like to call it. But there's little areas where the yellow of the symbol and the utility belt kind of has a little bit of a novel effect, and even some of the shading they managed to work in a way that looks aesthetically pleasing. To me, I would argue that maybe my favorite part is probably around here, the chest and shoulder area towards the outer rim part of the pecs. So you can kind of see right here that you have a mixture of the lighter gray pixelization with the bat symbol, but then right underneath it, to kind of generate like a simulated shadow, you have darker black pixelization. And that's kind of cool. You don't see that throughout the entirety of the body. They didn't go ham with it and just kind of over stylize it. They put just enough to make it seem like it really is kind of a textured suit that is now fluctuating and moving about because the pixel effects are kind of in motion. So it complements. It works with each other very well, at least from the front side. So everything that you kind of see before you hear from the front, and even a little bit of the shading happening within the utility belt and specific squares having just the corners slightly pixelized with like a darker orange. I don't know what it is, but it strangely works. The only thing that I'm a little indifferent on is just, like I said, the rather sizable giant bat symbol there that sure has the pixelization, but it's just a little exaggerated as far as proportions and size. I kind of wish that it was just a little bit on the smaller side, but I understand because they wanted to make it a little bit bigger in the game, so there's a logical explanation. It has to be larger in the game so you can kind of tell this is Batman, and it sells the license, it sells the look because everything's so pixelized in that game that you kind of have to make it a little bit obvious. Kind of harkens back to a classic NES Batman game that I did in fact play, which is the '89 Keaton Batman game, the side-scroller, the beat-em-up, and I really do like that game, even though it was frustrating at certain parts, and I would tear my hair out trying to even get to the Joker at the end. But as far as I can really tell, like I said, the pixelization overall is pretty good from the front. The only criticisms I have is, like I said, the largeness of the bat symbol. It didn't translate all that greatly on the forehead. It looks a little smudgy, so I don't know what they had to really work with right there. Maybe it's because of the fact that they used this specific head. Maybe if they utilized the classic Nightfall Buck head from the singular releases, it probably would have worked a little better, but that's only wishful thinking at this point. And frankly, I understand that, again, this is a shortcut to minimize costs, but cutting on those costs only makes sense when your accessories are, kind of there to supplant the value that comes packaged here. However, the value then gets kind of murky when you consider this being a Build-A-Figure release. So naturally, one of the things that's tossed into the box is going to be the Build-A-Figure pieces, which in the case with Batman are going to be the arms. So you have the very big, massive, muscular, and very dark side arms here. And even though it's not doing anything to really give a final judgment as to whether or not I'm going to pick up the entirety of the set so I can build Darkseid, I'll admit that seeing these really robust pieces in person, as far as the detailing of the veins on the actual shoulders and the biceps, the musculature, the sculpture, and even a little bit of that pixelization, even though they just added just very minimalist addition here of the pixelization paint apps on the gauntlets themselves. And granted, the joints are a little bit sticky as far as what you get in the elbows, as far as swiveling and bending. It's still doing something to me that is kind of moving the needle just slightly towards the positive angle of maybe collecting the rest of the wave. Maybe not at full price. Let's say that maybe down the line they start discounting them by about $5 or they start going on clearance. Maybe that's when I'll pick them up. Or if I have money to burn, which frankly right now I can honestly say I don't. But later, if things maybe turn around and get a little bit more fortunate in my case, I will pick up the rest of the Task Force wave, take a look at those figures. Maybe they'll get their own individual shorts, and then maybe down the line build the dark side. Because right now I can only imagine that maybe seeing the torso and the head here and kind of building it upon that height right there, I can honestly say that would probably be a badass looking Darkseid with the darker color scheme, as opposed to that classic Darkseid that came out for about $40 that had like the cape and sold out in minutes. A lot of people really wanted that Darkseid. But after a while, I was like, I would like that, but just with like a darker aesthetic, but not full Zack Snyder, like the most recent release with the Throne. Something kind of in between. And I feel like what they went with as far as an art style for Darkseid in this game is kind of speaking to me. So to have a full-on, almost, not quite, but almost mega figure sized figure that comes in the form of a Build-A-Figure, that might actually fit the bill. So for now, it's a pause, but it's cool to see that I'm getting a little bit of a sneak preview of what that figure is going to look like in person with these arms. So the jury's still a little bit out. So considering that it comes with those Build-A-Figure pieces as secondary kind of passive accessories that you can't really do much with right now while you wait for the other figures in the wave, you're probably wondering, what does Batman himself come with? Well, it's the Nightfall Buck, so he's got to come with those extra gripping hands, that Batarang. Surprisingly, no, he does not come with any of that. No secondary hand accessories, no Batarang. I'm assuming that maybe he didn't really rely on them too much, or at least in terms of his gadgetry, he didn't really rely on an awful lot of that stuff in the game. Again, haven't played the game, but I can only imagine that there's got to be a reasoning for that outside of just the Build-A-Figure pieces for why they weren't included. It's the Nightfall Buck. He's always thrown in those goddamn accessories time and time again. So what do we get this time? We get something arguably more questionable. Punch effects! Yeah, I don't know how I really feel about this, to be quite honest. You get these like translucent blue punch effects that are made out of rubber, actually. It's not even plastic. They're full on rubber. They even have the ends here that kind of thin out and get a little bit more translucent and lighter on the blue shade. But they're also a little bit on the wobbly side because you can kind of bend them and flex them just a little bit. But at least that does wonders for making sure that they don't break easily. But then you'll notice that on the inside, they have crevices to fit into his shoulders, or rather his forearms. And they're rather narrow. And so when I saw the actual spacing and the cutouts that you get inside, I instantly noted that something tells me that those fists are not going to easily fit in there. And after some trial and error, I pretty much deducted that that's not going to be the case. So I wondered, I guess the only true way to get these things to actually go on his forearms are going to be to remove the fists, which have to be functionable, because, I mean, come on, it's the Nightfall Buck. The whole point of these things is to get the fists removed. And of course, giving them a slight tug, they come off. You got the nubs right there from the joints. So frankly, one of them has a much more narrow slit inside of the effect to slide in. And basically, you just do this. And lo and behold, there's your punch effect. You can kind of make it seem like maybe he's giving like an uppercut with this one. Kind of looking off to the side a little bit there. And then this one actually has a slightly much more open slit on there. So you can maybe try to flex and really force in the fist. There's so many ways that this phrasing could go wrong. But anyways, you can fist the effect right in there. But I've already tried it a couple of times. And even though it kind of sticks to it, you're probably just going to have an easier time simply just removing the fist just like you did with the other one and sliding in the forearm with the nub inside kind of on like so. And it kind of sticks just a little bit more accurately. And there you have it. Now, here's the thing. If by some chance I'm getting this wrong and this is not what the effects are supposed to be utilized for, and they're supposed to be like maybe launch effects that he's supposed to throw or projectiles, then I don't know. Blame McFarlane. Why? Because I literally went on a giant Google image search spree and could not find any images of McFarlane themselves actually utilizing these effects. It's crazy. Every single promo shot of this figure from McFarlane themselves does not have him utilize these effects. It's literally just him with the fists and then just kind of like in a neutral pose, and that's it. So I have no clue. Maybe this one's supposed to go on the other one, but then again, it doesn't really make it that much of a difference. Or maybe it is supposed to stick with the fist, but at the same time, like I said, it just feels kind of forced in there and doesn't want to grab onto it very accurately. Or maybe you're supposed to bend the nub in the opposite direction. Maybe that'll help. I don't know. But like I said, it's a little confusing. It's a little strange that this is what they opted with. And it's unique, it's different, because like you can kind of tell from the tone of my voice, I was getting just a little exasperated by the amount of times that he's been including those batarangs and those alternate hands. But this time around, I think I actually kind of missed them just slightly. And once you get him situated, this is more or less how he's supposed to be demonstrated with the punch effects. Again, could not find any single promo shot, whether it be those like white background versions of the shots that you find on either the McFarlane toy store or product pages for Amazon, Target, Walmart, or not really Walmart, but you get the gist, Big Bad Toy Store, etc. And then when it comes to some of those dynamic, badass, really well lit shots of the orange background, making it seem like it's in-game, which I will give them credit for at least a cool take on the box. I really like how clean the box looks with that orange background. As far as kind of this unique take, it kind of makes me make it seem like McFarlane himself was probably a fan of this game, so it's cool that maybe he treated that box with a little bit of that nostalgic tendencies. I just kind of wish that the Batman would be treated likewise, because outside of these punch effects, I am now, can't believe I'm really saying this, but I miss those secondary hands and that batarang, especially for the $24.99. In utilizing a Nightfall buck that we've already gotten released, I can't imagine that this would have been all that cost effective to toss in those secondary hands. Come on. Sure, he comes with the base in the card, and then a little bit of that plastic allocation had to be suited for the Build-A-Figure wave, since you're kind of getting 1/4 of a figure, but you really need to sell the property here, because as you can kind of tell from the lack of pre-order sellouts, because frankly, as of the timing of this recording, you can still pre-order this figure off of the McFarlane Toy Store. You can pre-order the entire wave, goddammit, from the McFarlane Toy Store, probably Amazon, Target, GameStop, most certainly GameStop, which is where I picked it up, and then of course fan channels like Entertainment Earth and Big Bad Toy Store. So since product is not really moving, not only am I confident that there will be some kind of clearance sale for the remainder of the wave, and that will be my gateway into picking up Darkseid, but you also need to be able to sell the property on top of the fact that you're already really utilizing this buck. So some secondary hands, punch effects are kind of unique, but it needs to be an addition, not a replacement. That's the key ingredient there. So for now, unless you're being a bit of a completionist, or like me, you're in the content creation space and you're just looking for ways to really extrapolate on the Nightfall buck, because trust me, it looks like we're going to be getting another ranking video sooner rather than later. I was thinking it was going to take up to a year, but we already got 2 brand new additions. There's a Robin out there that is, I think, based off of Crisis on Infinite Earths. That's a Fidgetal, and I think that's also garnishing the Nightfall buck and being utilized for it, as well as Catman, which I completely omitted from the ranking, and then forgetting purely by accident the Dick Grayson Batman. He's got the Nightfall buck. It's becoming kind of crazy. All right, we're hitting a little bit of a critical mass with this buck, so they need to be adding to the buck rather than either subtracting or replacing. And therefore, the Justice League Task Force will simply just sit at a very okay 6 out of 10. Again, unless you're collecting the Darkseid series here to have your own Build-A-Figure from that game, if you love the game just that much by some happenstance, or you're simply just a completionist, there's not a whole lot to pick this guy up at full price, and you're probably best waiting for some kind of clearance sale, which I gotta be honest, I'm pretty confident we're gonna be getting in the foreseeable future. But for now, if you guys are by some chance fans of the Justice League Task Force game, let me know down below what are your guys' memories of playing the game either on Super Nintendo or Sega Genesis, or even better, what's some kind of Marvel or DC game that you personally don't think gets enough respect? What's kind of like a hidden gem, a holy grail of a game based on those properties that often gets overlooked because it's based on a DC property or a Marvel property, but you think is probably something that people should really look into a little bit more, and it's a bit more obscure than it should be. Whatever you guys have to say, I'm looking forward to seeing what you guys have in store to put in the comment section. While you're down there, hit the thumbs up button if you enjoyed this video, thumbs down if you did not, and you guys know what to do. Take care, stay humble, and I'll see you on the next one.